Hey guys, welcome back to Fixie TV. I'm your host Anton, and in our last episode of PCs for Newbies, we gave you a basic overview of how a PC generally works. Today, we'll be diving deeper and showing you how to plan out and spec out the best PC for your needs. This is PCs for Newbies Episode 2, PC Part Picking. Coming up with the parts list is almost the first step you need to take when building your new computer. With the situation right now, you can't easily build a PC like you usually could, where you could go to your local retailers and buy parts off the shelf and ask for help there. Since you'll be buying these parts for yourself, you have to make sure that these parts are compatible with one another, as well as they fit within the budget you set for yourself. And lastly, are capable of fulfilling the uses you have for your PC. So I guess that leaves the question, where do you start? As we mentioned in the last episode of PCs for Newbies, setting a budget is one of the most important steps in building your PC parts list. This kind of dictates what kind of PC you'll be building, what combination of parts you'll be able to afford, and it helps you budget accordingly. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be working with 3 different budgets to kind of help you decide how much you'd actually be spending on your PC based on your needs. Additionally, for the budgets we set in this video, we're only accounting for brand new current gen parts. So this is the most current parts that you're gonna see off the shelf or on a website. We love used parts, but unfortunately for the beginners here, it's not ideal to go with used for your first build. So you won't be seeing any kind of scrapyard wars kinds of list in this video, but we're saving that for another video, so stay tuned. Before we show you our budget categories, please note that the prices are relatively high. This is possibly due to the chip shortage and increased interest in Bitcoin mining. So expect this price list to be on the higher side. We just want to make sure that the parts that we suggest are of quality and will last you a relatively long time. Since we also accounted for gaming in all these categories, the prices are a bit higher than your typical office PC. So take this information with a grain of salt if you're just building that. Our first budget category is on the low end. This is usually targeted to gamers that have a very limited budget to work with and are just getting into the space. Usually these people are console gamers or younger kids who just want to build their first gaming PC to play the latest FPS with their friends. We'd say this budget would be around 300 to 500 USD, or around 15,000 to 25,000 pesos. Our next budget category is for the gamers that want to delve into the more AAA titles and want to play at a higher FPS. This is a good entry point for people that want to play esport titles at a high refresh rate, like CSGO and Valorant. This is because having a high refresh rate monitor and a great GPU that gives you high FPS in games improves your gameplay. So we're setting this budget to around 35,000 to 55,000 pesos, or around $700 to $1,000 respectively. This last budget category is for the 10% of gamers out there that value high FPS, high resolution, and high quality gaming. These gamers also love to post their rigs on the PC Master Race subreddit to flex the new RGB fans that they got. We didn't place a budget ceiling on this price category because we knew that a lot of enthusiasts are willing to spend a lot of money on their PCs. But we usually see the enthusiasts starting at around 100,000 pesos or 2,000 US dollars for their next PC. At least at this point, they realize that they can start buying the latest and greatest hardware without compromising on anything. Alright, so we set our budget. Now we can give our recommendations for each budget category. As we mentioned in our previous video, there are about 7 to 8 PC parts when building your own gaming PC. So these are the CPU, RAM, motherboard, case, SSD, HDD, PSU, GPU, and lastly, your case. So let's start with the low-end PCs. Assuming you have around 20,000 pesos or $400 to work with, these are what we suggest that you get. We believe that these parts that we're going to recommend at this price range are going to give you a decent gaming experience, but at the same time give you a sturdy, everyday workhorse that will get you through any day-to-day task. So for the CPU, we recommend the Ryzen 3 3200G. This 4-core 4-thread CPU isn't the fastest, but definitely gets the job done, with the Vega 8 integrated graphics being able to play most games at decent FPS. You can expect to play most, if not all, esport titles at a respectable FPS with this CPU. We're pairing the CPU with an A320 motherboard and 8 gigabytes of RAM. We don't really have big suggestions for this, so just look for the cheapest A320 and 8 gigabytes of RAM you can find, and you'll be golden. The monitor we recommend is the AOC 18E970 SWNI. Although we tried our best to stick within the $15,000 or $300 price range, we noticed that a lot of people leave out the monitors and peripherals in their PC parts list. So if you don't have any of these already, you really want to budget this in before actually going out and buying anything. For the storage, we recommend you go with a 120GB SSD and a 1TB hard drive pairing. Again, whatever's cheapest at the time that you can find would work well with your system. For the power supply, we recommend you go with a 550-watt 80 plus bronze PSU. Again, we recommended certain parts in PCs for Newbies 1, so you can check that out here. Then you can just get any cheap computer case and slap all of them in there. Everything should fit just fine, and you don't have to worry about cooling that much because the parts you have are relatively low end. If we were to make any changes to this PC part list, we'd change the A320 motherboard to a B450 motherboard. This would open up your upgrade path to a better CPU down the line, preferably one that doesn't just have integrated graphics. Please note that getting a Ryzen CPU with G at the end means it has integrated graphics, but less processing power. So if you have processors like the Ryzen 5 3600 that don't have a G at the end, that means they don't have integrated graphics and you'll be needing a dedicated graphics card to run that PC and CPU. For the mid-range budget, it was kind of tricky for us because we had to make two lists to account for the two teams that we're playing for, Team Blue and Team Red. For the Intel build, the CPU we went with was the i5-10400F. This CPU is what we think a good bang for your buck CPU should be. Around 8,000 pesos, less than $200 at the time of recording of this video. Not to mention it has 6 cores and 12 threads, and it runs at around 2.9 GHz and even boosts up to 4.3 GHz. This greatly compares to the Ryzen 5 3600 on Team Red's end, but is known to push more frames than the said CPU. Slapping 16 gigs of RAM and the B365 motherboard with it, you're gonna get a really good mid-range platform. For the graphics card, we decided to go for the GTX 1660 Super. So you may be wondering why we chose to go for this GPU for a mid-range build. Usually we want to go for something a bit higher end, like an RTX 2060 or an RX 580 even. This is because it's known to push more frames, but given the GPU climate right now where everything is overpriced and a simple RTX 1660 Super costs about 20,000 pesos or $400 alone, we decided to stick with this because it's the best thing we can get for the budget at the time of filming this video. You can even say that a 15,000 peso GTX 1080 can surpass this graphics card. On another note, the GTX 1660 Super has a decent NVENC encoder that's supplemented with the 6 gigs of DDR6 memory. This is a good feature, especially when you're streaming higher end games. Like the last list, we'd recommend you get a 1TB hard drive, but we think you should up your game and use an NVMe SSD for this. We'd recommend around 250 gigabytes of NVMe SSD storage. For the PSU, we'd still recommend at least a 550-watt 80 plus bronze power supply. This will be more than enough to sustain your needs for the gaming PC, and it should accommodate for builds in the future. Making the high-end PC was a lot more fun because we had more money to work with. The system we're working with isn't the highest in terms of specs, but it's the best that we can work with given a sensible budget. If you just wanted the highest end PC, you can easily go to pcpartpicker, sort by most expensive, and see what fits and works. In any case, here are our recommendations for the high-end PC parts list. For the CPU, we'd recommend you go with the Ryzen 5 5600X. Although it only has 6 cores and 12 threads, it can easily go toe-to-toe with the 10th gen i7 CPUs that have more cores. Not to mention, this is also one of the best performing CPUs of 2020. You can pair the CPU with 32 gigs of RAM at 3600 MHz or 3800 MHz. Pair this with an X570 motherboard and you're off to the races with all the AAA titles you can ever imagine, especially if you pick the right graphics card for the resolution you want to play at. Now that we mentioned GPUs, we highly recommend you pick your GPU based on the resolution you're going to be playing at. Since your GPU is usually the largest budget allocation in your PC budget parts list, for 1080p, we'd recommend you go with the RTX 3060 Ti or RTX 3070. If you've watched our comparison video, you know that these GPUs perform similarly, so it's up to you to see what you want. If you want to play at 1440p, we highly recommend you get the RTX 3080. This gives you a lot of graphics power, but at the same time, the performance of this GPU is comparable to the 3060 Ti and 3070 at 1080p, but you're getting the same FPS at a higher resolution, like 1440p or 4K. For the storage, you can get as much space as you need, but we recommend you get NVMe PCIe Gen 4 storage because this is lightning fast and you won't be able to get anything faster on the market. As for the power supply, we recommend you go with a 750 watt 80 plus gold rated power supply. This ensures your PC is amply powered and you have room to upgrade in the future. Pair this with a high refresh rate, high resolution monitor, and your whole gaming experience will be well worth $2,000 or 100,000 pesos. Well, that was a buttload of information to process, but if you want to see the parts list that we recommend, we link them down below. As we mentioned earlier, it's important to plan out your PC before actually building it. This way, you can budget your hard-earned money properly and spec out the PC of your dreams. This also helps you develop a healthy curiosity to spec out the PC the way you like it, and according to your needs. We highly recommend you watch other YouTube videos, like benchmark videos, to see the actual performance of these parts so you know what you're actually getting into. This way you can make a properly informed decision when buying parts, and you won't be able to get buyer's remorse. With that being said, an informed decision is always the best decision when purchasing anything. Well, that's the end of the video. If you liked the video, leave a thumbs up and comment down below. If you want to see more content like this or any other tech videos on our channels, hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you know when we actually post every week. The next episode is going to be about how to build your actual computer, so stay tuned for that. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, see ya.